Hey Jillian, you made a lot of really good points. One of the things that you talked about that really hit me was the positive versus negative feedback point and looking at it like a bank and how, every time you give a student negative feedback, you're depleting, from them. And then every time you give them positive feedback, you're putting, things back into them. And how you have to have a lot more positive feedback than negative feedback in order for it to balance out. Um, there are some students that I know for a fact receive so little positive feedback. Like one student in particular, it was his birthday, and I literally just said his name to get his attention because he was walking over to get water and I wanted to say happy birthday to him. So all I did was say his name, and he looked at me with this like very defensive look, like what? Like I was going to give him some kind of negative feedback, and all I said was, "Oh, happy birthday." And he was like, "Oh, thanks," and his face just immediately changed. And that's when I realized, like, okay, the student is so used to getting or negative feedback that he just assumed that whatever I would say to him would have to be negative, even though it was his birthday. And that's when I was like, okay, yeah, definitely it matters, it makes a difference, and I need to be more conscious of giving this student and all of my students really more positive feedback. And sometimes I'll think, okay, I'll give, I have to make this correction, but then I'm going to go give them some positive feedback later. But it doesn't really balance out that way. It's not a one-to-one ratio, and that's so true. And so that was something that really spoke to me. But as far as the names on the papers go, yeah, with the older kids, I definitely have less sympathy for them than I did with the younger kids. I'm also in a fifth grade classroom, and again, I'll tell them that if you're incapable, and I remind them multiple times, put your name on your paper, put your finger on your name, and make sure that your name is on your paper. And my thing is like if I tell them always, if you don't show work, I can't give you partial credit, and if you don't put your name, I can't give you any credit. And so I also kind of have been that way. I've recycled papers because they didn't have names on them. But one of the things that I can remember my previous teachers doing that I think was a lot kinder was every time they would have a paper with no name on it, they would just write on the top in red ink, name question mark, and then they would have almost like a clothesline in their room for graded papers that didn't have a name on them. And then once they put grades in, they could go back in, and if the student looked and said, well, I turned that in, how come I didn't get a grade, you could say, okay, you can go check and see if you can find your paper on that like clothesline or whatever. They could go up and see like, oh, this one's mine, and grab it. And I guess that's more of a merciful way, and it's still causing the student to have to do a little bit more work by taking the initiative to see that they didn't get their grade, even though they did it, completed the assignment, and turned it in. But they had to go through and find their paper so that, teachers aren't having to do investigative work and do handwriting, matching and that kind of thing. So, yes, that is one strategy that I've seen that has worked. It's a little harder since we're not really in our own classrooms right now to kind of create space for something like that. So, we'd have to definitely talk with a mentor teacher. But I do think that that could be one possible strategy so that students aren't just automatically receiving zeros on assignments because of names. And I do think that's one way that we subconsciously lower expectations for students. But that is part of like keeping high expectations, is everyone, you know, needs to be able to keep up with this. So anyway, that's just one idea that I had.